Mike Ehrmantraut never wanted to be the center of the story. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He wasn't the smartest chemist. He wasn't even the most ambitious criminal. But somehow, he became the most dependable one. And in a world like Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, dependability is a strange thing to admire because dependability in that world doesn't mean kindness, it doesn't mean morality, it doesn't even mean loyalty in the traditional sense. It means something colder. It means that when things go wrong, you're the one people call to clean it up. And Mike Ehrmantraut built an entire life around that idea. Not around power, not around money, around being the professional. But the strange thing about professionalism in a criminal world is that it demands discipline in places where conscience should live. And over time, those two things start to look very similar. Because Mike wasn't a chaotic man. He didn't chase thrills the way Walter White did. He didn't seek validation like Jimmy McGill. He didn't crave status like Gus Fring. Mike just worked. And for most of his life, that felt like enough. But professionalism has a cost. And Mike Ehrmantraut might be the clearest example in television of what happens when a man convinces himself that doing something efficiently is the same thing as doing it right. Mike Ehrmantraut didn't start as a criminal mastermind. He started as a cop. Philadelphia Police Department. And on paper, that sounds like the beginning of a very different story. But in Mike's world, the line between order and corruption was never very thick. The department he worked in was already dirty. Bribes weren't shocking. They were routine. The system had already decided what kind of man it would reward. And Mike adapted to that system the way he would adapt to every system afterward. Quietly, methodically, professionally. He didn't see himself as a bad cop. In his mind, he was just surviving inside a bad environment. That's an important detail about Mike, because he never saw himself as the villain of his own life. Very few people ever do. Instead, Mike told himself a different story. That he was doing what he had to do. That he understood the rules of the world better than others did. That if corruption was inevitable, the only logical thing to do was manage it carefully. And for a while, that logic worked. Until the day it didn't. Mike's son Matt followed him into the police force. And Matt had inherited something Mike had long since buried. Conscience. When Matt discovered the corruption inside the department, he didn't know what to do with it. He wanted to be honest. He wanted to do the right thing. And Mike, the professional, gave him advice that would change both of their lives forever. Take the money, because refusing it would make the other officers suspicious. And suspicion in a corrupt system is more dangerous than guilt. Matt listened to his father, and it cost him his life. The officers he worked with killed him anyway, just to be safe. Mike's philosophy had failed in the worst way possible. His attempt to teach his son how to survive corruption had delivered him straight into it. That moment becomes the quiet tragedy that defines Mike Ehrmantraut, because everything he does afterward is an attempt to carry the weight of that mistake, not by becoming a better man, but by becoming an even more disciplined one. By the time we meet Mike in Better Call Saul, he has already decided what kind of person he is going to be. Not a hero, not a villain, a professional. And that word means something very specific to Mike. Professionals don't lose control. Professionals don't create unnecessary chaos. Professionals don't lie to themselves about the job. If someone needs to be threatened, you threaten them. If someone needs to be watched, you watch them. And if someone needs to disappear, you make that happen too. But you do it cleanly. You do it carefully. You do it without ego. In Mike's mind, that restraint separates him from the monsters around him. It's why he despises people like Hector Salamanca. It's why he grows increasingly frustrated with Walter White, because both of them break the rule Mike lives by. They let pride interfere with professionalism. And pride, in Mike's experience, is the most dangerous force in the criminal world. It makes people sloppy. It makes them emotional. And emotions get people killed. Mike's entire identity becomes built around avoiding that weakness. But identity is a strange thing, because the more carefully you construct it, the harder it becomes to question it. Mike convinces himself that professionalism is a moral boundary, that he is different from the reckless criminals around him. But when you look closely, that boundary isn't as solid as he believes, because professionalism doesn't erase consequences. It just organizes them. Working for Gus Fring is where Mike's philosophy reaches its purest form. Gus runs a criminal empire built on precision. Everything is controlled, everything is calculated, everything is quiet, and for Mike, this environment feels almost comfortable. It's the closest thing the criminal world has to order. Gus isn't impulsive. He doesn't chase ego the way Walter does. He treats crime like logistics. And Mike understands logistics, security routes, observation patterns, risk management, contingency plans. In many ways, Mike becomes the backbone of Gus's entire operation. Not because he's the boss, but because he's the man who makes sure the boss's plans actually work. He recruits the right people. He protects the operation. He manages the problems before they become disasters. And unlike Walter White, Mike never mistakes this role for power. He knows exactly what he is. He's the man behind the curtain, the one who ensures that everything continues running smoothly. But that stability comes with a quiet contradiction, because the more efficient Mike becomes at maintaining Gus's empire, the more people that empire harms. Drugs move faster. Violence becomes more organized. The machine runs better. And Mike keeps telling himself that his professionalism is what keeps things from becoming worse. That if someone more reckless had his position, the damage would be greater. It's a comforting belief. And maybe there's even some truth in it. But comfort and truth aren't always the same thing. Because at the end of the day, the system Mike helps maintain still destroys lives. Just more efficiently. One of the most fascinating things about Mike Ehrmantraut is the way he sees children. His granddaughter Kaylee represents the only part of his life untouched by corruption. Every decision Mike makes, every dangerous job he takes, he frames as being for Kaylee. He wants to leave her something better, money, security, a future untouched by the mistakes he made, and this motivation feels noble, almost heroic, but the show quietly asks a difficult question. Is it really about Kaylee, or is it about Mike needing a reason to forgive himself? Because providing for Kaylee allows Mike to reinterpret his criminal life as sacrifice. It transforms guilt into duty. Instead of admitting that he's trapped in a system of violence, he can believe he's enduring it for someone else, and that belief is powerful. Humans are incredibly skilled at turning uncomfortable truths into meaningful narratives. Mike isn't unique in that way. He's just honest enough to occasionally glimpse the cracks in the story. There are moments when the weight of what he's doing becomes impossible to ignore. Moments when the professional mask slips just slightly. When he admits, almost reluctantly, that he broke his son. That the lesson he taught Matt about corruption came from Mike's own fear. Because the truth Mike rarely says out loud is this. He didn't just survive corruption. He became comfortable inside it. And that comfort is the thing he can never forgive himself for. Then Walter White enters the story. And Walter is everything Mike is not. Walter is emotional, impulsive, proud, insecure. Where Mike sees systems, Walter sees personal validation. Where Mike values discipline, Walter values recognition. And from the moment they begin working together, the tension is inevitable because Walter doesn't understand the rules Mike lives by. To Walter, crime is a battlefield for ego. To Mike, it's a job that requires control. This difference eventually leads to one of the most quietly devastating moments in the entire series. Mike's death, it doesn't happen in some elaborate showdown. There's no grand speech, no cinematic revenge, just frustration. Walter loses his temper and pulls the trigger. And the tragedy of the moment isn't just that Mike dies, it's that Mike immediately recognizes how pointless the act was. Walter didn't kill him for strategy, he killed him because his pride was hurt. And in Mike's final moments, the professional mask finally falls away. He doesn't beg, he doesn't panic. He just tells Walter to shut up and let him die in peace. Because Mike has spent his entire life managing chaos. And in the end, chaos still finds him. All the discipline, all the caution, all the careful planning, none of it mattered in that moment. One man's wounded ego erased it all. There's something deeply human about Mike Ehrmantraut, not because he's a good man, but because he's a believable one. Mike represents a very common kind of moral compromise. The slow, quiet kind. The kind that doesn't happen all at once. It happens through small decisions, practical decisions, logical decisions. Each one individually defensible, each one slightly easier than the last. Until eventually, the line between survival and participation disappears completely. Mike didn't wake up one morning and decide to become a criminal fixer. He just kept adapting to the world around him. First as a cop, then as a grieving father, then as a man trying to provide for his family. At every stage, the choices felt temporary, necessary, reasonable. But when you connect those choices together, they form a life. And that life carries consequences. Not just for Mike, but for everyone around him. What makes Mike such a compelling character is that he understands this. At least partially. He's not blind. He knows what he is. He knows the damage he's involved in. But instead of pretending otherwise, he tries to impose rules, order, professionalism. And in a strange way, those rules are his attempt at morality. They're the last structure standing between him and complete nihilism. If the work must be done, then at least it should be done carefully. If violence must exist, then at least it should be controlled. It's not a perfect philosophy, but it's the one Mike chooses to live by. And the tragedy is that even that careful philosophy can't escape the gravity of the world he operates in. Mike Ehrmantraut's story isn't really about crime, it's about responsibility. About what happens when a person tries to carry the weight of a mistake for the rest of their life. Some people collapse under that weight, others deny it completely. Mike does something different. He organizes it, he builds a system around it, he turns guilt into discipline. But discipline isn't redemption, and professionalism isn't absolution. It's just a way of surviving the consequences a little longer. In the end, Mike Ehrmantraut leaves behind very little. No empire, no legend, no grand transformation, just a quiet trail of work done efficiently in a world that never rewards restraint. And maybe that's the most honest part of his story, because the truth about professionalism, especially in a broken system, is that it doesn't make you the hero. It just makes you the one who lasts a little longer than the rest, until eventually, even the professional runs out of time.